when I came into Presbyterianism, I had been raised for the first 20 years of my life in the Christian Reformed Church, and that's all I knew. And when I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, there was no CRC church within 200 miles.
Right.
So I kind of flirted with a Baptist church for a while until my dad told me, nope, you're going to the PCA church. Mm-hmm. And so then I came into the PCA church, and I started really sinking my teeth into Presbyterianism. And what I found there was a lot of the richness of the Dutch Reformed perspective, but certain things that were an enhancement of it, and things that I had never really heard about in my Dutch Reformed upbringing. For instance, the regulative principle of worship. Mm. And when I started to really explore this, I realized I've had a pretty good portion of the Reformed faith, handed to me by my parents and my church. But there's aspects of the Reformed faith that come more through Presbyterianism that I really have never really fully appreciated. Mm-hmm. And it became kind of a confluence of two streams. And I felt like, wow, I've got the best of both worlds, because there's a lot of good in the Dutch Reformed world, but there's a lot of good in Presbyterianism too. And when those two come together, there's a richness there, just fascinating.
I found, I have only been coming into contact with the continental tradition over the last several years, namely moving back to the Midwest, because I grew up in a mainline Presbyterian church. It was a conservative one at that, but nevertheless, mainline. Wasn't catechized as a child. That wasn't something that our church or family tradition did. But then when I went off to Westminster, you live in a Presbyterian bubble, so to speak. I mean, the closest URC church, if I'm not mistaken, is in New York City. And that's been tough for some of our URCNA brothers. I know friends of mine, Sam Perez and Dan Ragusa, they might go study at Westminster, but they don't have a place in their own denomination to attend, or federation to attend.
Of course, Dan did study first. He got his MDiv at Mid-America.
Amen. Yes.
But I recommended him to go for the PhD at Westminster.
And he's a very capable student. But it can be different. And so my point is, though, all I ever knew was Presbyterianism. And then I find that having the more ecumenical experience and contact with brothers of the same convictions and in the same instincts, really, yet just coming from a different confessional tradition, nevertheless the same theological positions and whatnot, has just enriched my Christian life so much. And largely that not only is from the CRC and URC influence in the Midwest, but also through my involvement in Mid-America Reformed Seminary. I so much appreciate that, to see both sides of things. And I mean that in the way that there's not a division, but, there's a harmonious, you see kind of two instantiations of a similar Reformed conviction, Reformation conviction here in the continental and in the Presbyterian side of things.
And I think it's helpful to remember the necessity for both. And what I mean by that is, I think sometimes people figure, well, the three forms are 16th century with Dort being early 17th, and then you have more mid-17th century with Westminster, and so Westminster kind of, takes up everything in those previous documents. Well, the foci, the interests are a bit different, and you really still need them all. I mean, this morning I was highlighting, for example, and I do this with several things, but we could just take what I did in the conference, having to do with the Lord's Supper. Belgic Confession 35, we do not have we in my view, we can't dispense with that. And I'm happy to work in an institution where I get to, I both, it's required, but I get to subscribe the three forms. I like to subscribe them. I want to, because there are things that Belgic Confession 35 positively reflecting Calvin's, I think, very beautifully developed view of the Eucharist is there, and it's not reflected in the same way. Westminster doesn't doesn't contradict it or in any way deny it, but Westminster very much has an interest in distinguishing a proper view because coming out of the English church, there was still a lot of Roman Catholic kind of sympathies. So the Presbyterians are wanting over against the Anglicans to make really clear that we're not Roman Catholic in our doctrine. Whereas, as I said, the Belgic is very much coming off the Gallican Confession, which is just sort of pure Calvin. But we really need both of the traditions. And you look at a question like 1 in Heidelberg, there's nothing quite like that anywhere. Or question 60, which is how are we righteous before God? And there's, again, it's as fine an example of that. But I like to hear from somebody like Bob Godfrey, who comes from that tradition, then say things about Westminster, Larger Catechism, for example, 77, which distinguishes justification and sanctification. And he says, this is the best question on this sort of thing anywhere. This is the heart of the Reformation. And I think he's right. I guess it's all to say, I think the two traditions need each other. I really do. And I think I believe that there is an imperative. I've been blessed to work since 1998 on the board of Great Commission Publications, which is our joint venture with the PCA.
The OPC.
The OPC and the PCA.
Right.
But then I've been working for a decade almost, OPC and URC, particularly on the book that we produced, the Trinity Psalter Hymnal. And that's been just such a great blessing. And I think we need, particularly as the times grow worse, as the culture darkens, we need more and more working together, because the culture doesn't distinguish. You know, if the culture was dealing with, if the broader society were dealing with a URC person and an OPC, if I could be blunt about it, they would shoot either one of us because they wouldn't distinguish us. To them, we're the same. And we do have these differences, and I'm not saying the differences are inconsequential, and you don't have to work out polity differences. I think they're chiefly. But I think there's an ecumenical imperative. I don't know if this was where this conversation was meaning to go.
Well, that's where we are now.
Well, but I really do think there is such, and I think it's where we need. I think those that are really confessional from the continental tradition and the Scottish, British, American tradition we need to work together more and more, because, and if I can say this, if somebody's confessional in another tradition, I have more in common with them than I do somebody who, in my own tradition, who may not be really very confessional.